Welcome back, fellow football fanatics. This is College Football with Sam, and joining us for the first time ever on the show is Juck on Bucks, someone who I am very honored to have on here. He has invited me on his show a few times, for which I am very grateful, and now I get to do the honor of inviting him on to talk about not just Ohio State football, which is his team, it's his main area of expertise, but he's an expert on, I would say, all things college football, recruiting, the portal. I think he's covered the sport very well, and he's a very young channel who's just hit 10,000 subscribers. So before we get started here, I want you all to go over on his channel, hit the like button, subscribe to his channel, and also hit his notification bell. That way you can get notified when he releases new content. Don't just subscribe. I'm tripping over myself here. To Juck on Bucks, subscribe to Juck on CFB as well. He has two channels. Subscribe to those. Be active, comment, watch his stuff. It's very good. And also, as a reminder to all of you, if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button on my channel, hit the notification bell, comment any questions or statements you have about this show that we're doing in the comment section below, and like the video. How are you doing, Juck?
Sam, I'm fantastic. Thank you so much for having me on, buddy. I've been, you were one of the very first YouTube college football channels I ever started watching back when you weren't even on the screen. It was just your graphics. And I was like, man, this guy sounds about my age. He knows what he's talking about. Then you show up on the screen, you're 20 years old. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, that was a shocker for a lot of people, for sure. I'm glad that you're doing well, glad that your channel's doing well, and I'm excited to talk some ball here.
Absolutely. Let's get to it.
So first and foremost, just very briefly, it's something that I just thought about, but if you could spend a few seconds recapping to everyone how you felt about winning the national championship, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Being that it was, I feel like, and I know that there are other schools or fans of schools that feel this way, but I feel like Ohio State has had so many doggone near misses, so many bites at the apple where they've come up short for one reason or another. And it just felt like coming into this year, as soon as the season ended last year with that Missouri Bowl game, which a lot of people just turned the page over quickly. I was very, very angry about it. The way it went down, the decisions made with the offensive line in that game in particular. And I was very, very down on Ryan Day. And then heading into the off season, the vibe was just really negative on my end. And then as things started kind of progressing throughout that off season, seeing him make some changes in the way he was, he took on Julian Sayin and he took him into a class that already had Aaron Nolan committed. That's a movie he wouldn't have made before. And it felt like, okay, he's getting a little bit more cutthroat with things. He's always been big on culture and great at it. And that move felt kind of out of character. Then we roll into giving up plays and bringing in Chip, and just these changes started getting me excited. And then as I was first starting the channel, I was so much more involved. So being as involved as I was, and then going through it on this end, covering the team, getting to know some of the guys and the recruits and things, like it was just fantastic to see the way it played out. I couldn't have believed, if you had told me after the Michigan game that we were going to win it all, it was just an amazing feeling to come back from that. I was at that Tennessee game. I was at the Rose Bowl. That Tennessee game was the weirdest experience I've ever had in my life at the Horseshoe, seeing 30,000 Tennessee folks in there, freezing cold night. The most fun game I think I've ever been to in my life, though. It was a crazy run. It was unbelievable. But much like Brian Hartline, who had an interview, I think just the other day, he said, I'm over it. I'm on to the next. And I don't know what it is, but it's like a loss, or a big letdown will linger with me the entire offseason. We win the national championship. 2 weeks I was riding a high, and now I'm all on to 26. Like class of 26 right now is what I'm working on. So, but a great time, man. It was awesome.
Yeah, that's absolutely incredible. I can imagine that going to the Tennessee game and then the Rose Bowl and seeing your team open up with a 21-0 and then a 34-0 run is just an avalanche of ecstasy is probably the only way to describe it for sure. I know that when I went to the national championship game in 2023 between Michigan and Washington, we didn't jump out to a 21-0 lead, but that initial 14-0 lead, that was one of the best feelings I've ever felt. So
Sure.
that's incredible. I want to start out with, you said you're already on to the next thing, and I feel that way because after 2023, I was on to, okay, can my team not repeat, because that was unsustainable in my mind, but can they reach their ceiling the following year? Can this be sustained? And what helps sustain great programs, Ohio State, I think, being the best program, if not a top 2 program at the bare minimum in college football, staffing and hiring great staffers, and whether that's promoting from within, hiring from the outside, but just retooling and reloading is not only a recruiting thing, it's a staffing thing, it's a developmental thing. I want to get your thoughts and analysis on promoting Brian Hartline to replace Chip Kelly, having Tyler Bowen coming in as the offensive line coach, Keenan Bailey was promoted to co-offensive coordinator, and also talk about Chip Kelly and Jim Knowles a little bit and the impact they had and what them leaving kind of means.
Yeah. Just to take it back, when we look at last off season, what Ryan Day did with the staff, he really nailed it. He nailed it. He went out and got Carlos Loughlin, and I thought that was a hire that really went under the radar. And he just, obviously bringing in Chip was kind of lucky. Brought in Matt Guerrieri from Indiana, and I thought that turned out to be a really great hire, and I think he's a great addition to the staff. As we move on, I just am starting to get a whole lot of faith in his decisions when it comes to these hiring decisions. The thing with Jim Knowles was a shocker to me, man. I was actually, when that news first broke that he was supposedly flirting with Oklahoma, I was even messing with the Oklahoma fans. I thought it was a message board fodder. You know what I mean? I'm thinking that there's no way he would do that. And then come to find out, not only was he flirting with Penn State too, but he was the one reaching out to them. And I was just flabbergasted. They kept that under wraps good, man. There was no rumors about any discontent. They did really well with that. But now we find out that Jim Knowles he's kind of a childish guy, man. That's the way it all came out to me. Having, the discussion that he had, letting out all the dirt afterwards with CBS. That was an anonymous source. It was either him or his fiance, who basically tweeted the whole thing that was in that article on CBS that Brandon Marcello did after he left. But good riddance. I think he's a great defensive coordinator. I think it adds a little spice to that Penn State game, which I love, and I wish that Ohio State and Penn State would have protected. They play this year, so that's great.
Yes.
But they won't play annually anymore in the future, which I very much dislike.
Same
but,
here.
Yeah, I think that's a real bummer for all of us college football fans. That's a great series right there. But I am, obviously Chip, he leaves under different circumstances. He was very happy. He got a sweetheart deal out with the Raiders, and I don't know how you turn that down. And it always felt to me like with Chip when he came in that this was going to be a shorter term here. I didn't think this was long term. I thought it would be longer than a year. But when we listen to Ryan Day talk about it, it sounds like maybe that was the goal: win a national championship and get Chip back in the NFL. Worked out for both of them. So onward and upward he goes. As far as Brian Hartline, a lot of people weren't thrilled about it. They say in 2023 we tried this and it was a disaster. And my thing is, in 2023, it felt to me like Ryan Day, and he pretty much told us this in 24, how difficult it was for him to give up plays to Chip Kelly, right? To Chip Kelly and Bill O'Brien, two experienced dudes. And people were blaming this on Hartline, and it felt to me like it was just as much Ryan Day not wanting to give it up as it was maybe Hartline wasn't quite ready for the run scheme to get in there and do that. And it kind of felt like maybe it was a mutual decision. I didn't think it was a disaster by any means. Anyway, Brian Hartline has obviously well documented what he's done on the recruiting trail, but he's been such an integral part of that staff for the entire time Ryan Day's been there. And when he talks to the players, when he communicates, on the sideline, he looks like a second head coach out there.
Yeah.
And he's respected by everybody. You know, he's younger, he's cool, played in the NFL for a long time, former Buckeye. He's just so valuable and so special to the program that it felt to me like Ryan Day was happy that he feels comfortable now to be able to give this to him. And Brian Hartline now obviously remains in the program for another 3 years. We're very lucky and very fortunate to have had him for this long. I thought by now, you know, if you'd asked me 3 years ago, would he be around, you know, at this point, I'd say no way. Somebody would have swooped him and promoted him by then. But to be able to have him in the loop, and what Ryan did by surrounding him with Tyler Bowen, who's called plays at Virginia Tech, obviously their offensive coordinator coming in now to coach the offensive line, and not much talked about, but Billy Fessler was an offensive coordinator at Akron U. He is the quarterback's coach. And then Ryan Day himself, you know, there's a big support staff around Brian Hartline to help him out with this. So I'm very confident in the move and feeling more and more confident about Ryan Day's knowing exactly what he wants for the program. I also think with internal hires, you know, there's a part of me that thinks that Ryan Day runs such a good culture. It's such a good organization, right? And that starts from the top, and, you know, rewarding loyalty, being, you know, treating your people good, making them want to come into a system, be able to grow into a system. You teach them what you want them to do, and they strive to get to the top with you, not somewhere else. That's something that everybody strives for in every company. Being able to do that in the coaching level is sometimes difficult because there's someone better out there. When we look out there, Sam, Will Stein, I had on my wish list. That was about it, man. There was nobody out there that was popping, and I was just like, man, I want him. Will Stein wasn't leaving Oregon. So if he wasn't leaving Oregon, and we can keep Brian around for a couple more years, make him happy, and I do think he's going to be pretty good with that support system that Ryan Day surrounded him with. I'm very happy with it.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. The more I thought about the Brian Hartline move, the more my mind began to, I guess, piece together the simple phrase, there's no downside to this. Like if it indeed fails, his support system is so good that you can probably salvage the year and figure something else out in 2026. But then also, if it succeeds, well, sweet, because you get to keep him around, and he's a very valuable asset. You probably get to keep him around for a few more years. I know that he's interviewed for different head coaching positions before, but the Ohio State offensive coordinator position is probably more valued than almost all G5 head coaching positions in terms of salary and definitely in terms of resources. I liked the offensive staff moves for sure. I thought that they needed a better recruiter on the offensive line. Well, they have that in Tyler Bowen. They have a better recruiter and a guy who, given his track record with tight ends, might end up being a better developer on the offensive line too. I think that Keenan Bailey's a pretty good tight ends coach. I don't know why they promoted him, but I'm going to assume it's because others were probably looking at him as a way to just retain him, give him a deserved raise. And then for Hartline, he's been around for long enough. He's learned under Day and under Kelly to the point where, yeah, give him a shot at offensive coordinator. Let him call the plays and let it be either him or by committee with all the support around him. I just think it's good. I will say that the pros of internal hires are, if the culture is great, if everything is at an A level or, as close to perfect as you can get, well, it's a good way to ensure that you have more continuity than constantly going outside of your backyard to find new pieces. The downside of it, and I don't think this is what's happening, but you never know, because the example I use is something that I don't think a lot of people saw happening. At some point with Clemson, for example, under Sweeney, he just kept internally promoting, and then it got to where it is now, where he had to go outside again after it fell off. But I think that Ohio State's a better program than Clemson. I think that Day right now is a better coach than Sweeney. And such a move or such an event happening where the internal promotions just fail and it causes the program to slide is something that I wouldn't really predict with Ohio State. It could take a lot of courage / idiocy to do that.
I
The final
I think there's
position.
a big problem. Sorry, I think there's a big when you get into too many internal hires, you kind of run the danger of having too many yes men. And I did like that Ryan Day had some people in Jim Knowles, in Chip Kelly, that could come back at him. You know what I mean? Guys with
Yes.
experience. That Bill O'Brien was the same way if he'd have stayed. And I do like having somebody like that because I think Dabo ran into the situation where he was becoming a little paterno there. You know what I mean? Like he's the Don and everybody's his subservient, a bunch of yes men around him. And I think that was a bad move, but it's not going to be like that with Tom Allen there. So I like that for them.
Yeah, Tom Allen and Garrett Riley are certainly not yes men, I would say.
Right.
So it's good for them. Maybe we'll talk about them at the end of the show when we go over a little bit of the 2025 year as a whole. But before that, Ohio State still has a defensive coordinator position to fill. I saw that they interviewed Matt Patricia today. I know that they flirted with Randy Bates earlier, at least that was the rumor. I don't know like how much of that was actually true. And I imagine they're interviewing a plethora of other candidates because it's a highly coveted job. I mean, you get to coach a defense that was coached, in my opinion, by the nation's best D coordinator over the past 3 years. So all those players have been developed by him. Ohio State always recruits well. They have excellent position coaches on that side of the football. So who wouldn't want to be the defensive coordinator at Ohio State? What's your thought on Matt Patricia, as it looks like that might be the hire, and also some other possible candidates?
Yeah. So I'm a college football guy, Sam. I don't dabble much into the NFL. I really don't anymore. But obviously I'm familiar with Matt Patricia. He's been around for a long time, though he has not held a full-time defensive coordinator position for quite a while. I think he came in and helped the Eagles in the back end of the 2023 season, maybe just for a couple months, wasn't retained on the staff. The guy's got a lot of baggage. I know that Buckeye fans, many were very, very angry when this came out. They don't want anything to do with him. They called him a culture killer. So I kind of went and did a little more research onto why everybody seems to hate this guy so much. And, turns out when he was the coach of the Lions, he was another one of these Belichick guys that came from his tree, much like Charlie Weiss, much like Josh McDaniels, who went somewhere and emulated Belichick and didn't realize that Belichick can get away with that because he's Belichick. You can't
Exactly.
treat people like that when you're a rookie head coach. And I don't know how you don't understand that, but these guys didn't. None of them did. Bill O'Brien, same way. So he gets canned in Detroit, obviously a jerk. But then I listened to an interview just about 6 months ago with him. And he was talking about Darius Slay, who had played for him and was one of the main targets of his vitriol when he was in Detroit. And he was talking about it. And the way he was talking about it was, he was very remorseful, saying he's trying to learn. He's trying to get better as a person. He shaved that disgusting long, gross beard, looked all trimmed up. He's lost 30 pounds. He looks good. And I was like, okay, now I understand why at least, he's not a total jerk, right?
No.
Because people were saying culture killer. And I'm like, man, this sounds horrible. But he sounds like a normal dude. And I just would imagine if Ryan Day were to bring him in, obviously Ryan Day knows the history. He knows what to look for. He's not going to, this guy is going to protect his culture at all costs because he's done such a great job building it. The players are they're all like, they sound like they're 27 years old. There's never any trouble. There's not an issue ever. And that's one thing, even when I've criticized Ryan Day, I've always pointed out that he has been fantastic with that. And anybody, we get into it back and forth, the Michigan Ohio State fans a lot. That's something that they would take shots at, and that's something I would always defend. That's just not true. He has a wonderful culture in that program. And as far as what he does schematically, I don't know, man. It doesn't really excite me. It doesn't really make me angry. When I look at the varying levels of success he's had throughout his career, I think you could say that running Bill Belichick's defense, he did well while he was there with Bill Belichick. Not so hot elsewhere. And that kind of gives you pause. But at the same time, when people say, he's not been in the college game since 2003, I get that. And I think that certainly matters to some degree. But ultimately, when you're a defensive coordinator, much like Jim Knowles, who was in his office just, making game plans to stop this offense. Like, you either know
Yes.
that or you don't. He's not being asked to do more than Jim Knowles did, which is Jim Knowles didn't recruit at all. He didn't go, he didn't have to do any of that. He just had to play solid defense. That's it. That was his job. And, he did fine at that. He's not exactly the most friendly guy, that's for sure. So it's not something I'm going to get irritated about because, again, I'll just go back to Ryan Day is starting to put a real track record together of making really good hires. So I'm at least going to give his guys a shot. If this was a second-year head coach hiring that guy, I might flip out a little bit. But, he's earned that grace coming off a national championship to me.
Yeah, I think that's pretty reasonable. I think if you are not going to be pessimistic about Patricia, because I personally am, if you guys couldn't already tell whether you follow me on Twitter or by my tone of voice, default to that because that's perfectly reasonable. And it's not like the assistant coaches are bad. They're all, I'd say, at minimum near elite, at the very best elite, and at the top of their game, which is incredible. And they have the players. They have Caleb Downs coming back, who's a veteran, and Sonny Styles, and a lot of their 2 deep finally rotated last year, especially late. So I think that he's going to come into a good position. I think any of the candidates will come into a good position. Personally, from an objective college football analyst point of view, wouldn't be a fan of it, but that is just me, and I am much more familiar with college than the NFL. So it would definitely be an interesting headline.
Mm-hmm.
Ohio State hiring the ex-Patriot defensive coordinator, a guy who's had a very up and down career, but someone who's certainly, of course, won multiple Super Bowls. Was there any truth to the Randy Bates news? Just as a brief side note before we move on.
I never had any concrete source I don't know where the leak came from, but it sure flew around fast like these things do. I do know there was some truth that there was some contact with the Joe Cullen camp. As far as that one went, but I don't know. I can't say for sure about Bates.
Okay. I wanted to make sure about that because I know people were expecting it, like people who know their stuff were expecting it to be announced and then it never happens. So I'm like, well, what happened? But yeah. I'm anxious to see who gets hired. It's a highly coveted position. Do you think it's an exaggeration to say that that's going to be the position that determines things next year? Because of what returns on the offense?
No, you're looking at eight new starters on defense, and it's my thought was if you really are going full bore to try to repeat or try to make a deep run in the playoffs, and you promoted Matt Guerrieri and maybe had Tim Walton assist him with that. It's a guy who has called his own defense before. Very familiar, obviously, with the scheme. Nothing changes for these guys. So now they're not walking in their first year starting and learning a new defense. Then I thought that I was good with that. If Guerrieri's the guy, I'm good with it. I think he is a really sharp guy. I think maybe had he stayed at Indiana or and Cignetti not come in, whatever. If he had stayed there, he would be the next guy who would be like, okay, this is the hot young Big Ten defensive coordinator that's getting hired up. Like we just saw Minnesota's guy get hired up to Miami. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I think that's
exactly.
the trajectory he's on. So if he were to get that promotion, I think it's pretty deserved. I just, when you look at a guy like, and somebody was saying, I was talking to Chris about Chris Drew. He always defaults to Tim Walton. Like, why does nobody, talk about Tim Walton getting up in that role? And I think it's like this, Sam. When you look at Tim Walton, you see everything that made this guy successful. He's smart. He's handsome. He loves people. He's tough. He's a former player, but he's got a great smile and everybody loves him. And you look at Matt Guerrieri and you just think that guy must be really smart because I don't see any of those qualities. He's just a whiteboard wizard. You know what I mean? And you could just see him. So I don't know. That's the impression I've always had of him.
Yeah, that's kind of the thought process I've had as this has gone on, especially since, Day can micromanage the offense and it can still be elite if that's a necessity, but he's an offensive guy. He's not a defensive guy. So he needs that presence on the defense to know what he's doing and to execute at a high level, which is why I think it's such an important hire. And to your point, Yeah, if you promote from within here, even though some people may not like it, you get continuity with a system that was just destroying almost everyone it faced last year. It was an absolute machine, and the backups were involved in that as well. That is one reason why when whether it was Bates or Patricia was mentioned, I kind of had some question marks in my head because it would be a pretty big scheme change, their system compared to Knowles based off of what I know. But I think we've talked about the hires and Ohio State staff for long enough. I think regardless of that, they have a top two head coach entering this coming season and a staff that is certainly one of the nation's best. So now I want to get to something that you brought up as an idea for the show and something that I love. There are three, there's probably more. This is probably an oversimplification, but let's just say there are three aspects to making sure your roster wins at the highest level. They are recruiting, they are developing, and recently portaling or use of the transfer portal to supplement any losses you have, to fill in some holes that any program may have, whether they have premature losses to the NFL, the portal itself, or sometimes even the best evaluators don't evaluate their talent correctly. Which of these do you prioritize and why? And does the portal decrease the need to recruit? Your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm a recruiting guy. I always have been. I'll usually always defer to that. But has it decreased? I think it depends what level your program's at. When you look at a program like Ohio State, like Michigan, um, when we talk about transfer portal additions, you're staying under that 10 number, right? You're not going out bringing in 23 guys like Ole Miss is every year. And when you're at that number where you're only bringing in 10, recruiting maintains, much more important than transfer portal additions because you're really only look at Ohio State this offseason. They had maybe two needs. Absolute, we got to go. We need this in the portal. And everything else was a little bit of depth here, a little bit of depth there, and a luxury piece. Now, ideally, you want to go into the portal having zero needs and everything can be just a luxury ad. And if you can get that done through the transfer portal, through recruiting, spend that money to retain your guys, I think you're always going to be better off. I think that's kind of been proven the last couple of years. Those teams, with those seniors and everything, the benefit that you get from having those older guys on top of it is just great. And I do think that there is kind of a backlash against recruiting. I'll put it this way. Justin Fry, you brought him up in his not very great recruiting. There were many people, and I was very hard on him because of his recruiting failures, but more so the strategy. I thought it was all wrong. I thought it was all backwards, and he always brought in too few numbers. And many people would say to me, it doesn't matter. We can go get those guys in the portal. And guess what? The portal rolls around. Ohio State goes and gets two really nice looking tackles in the portal. And their evidence to that is, see, look, now we're straight. Okay, yes, we are. But guess who we couldn't get? We couldn't get Dylan Thieneman, who would have been a luxury ad to stick next to Caleb Downs. That would have been fantastic. That would have been a piece that would have made this defense borderline elite again next year, in my opinion. And we couldn't afford it because we had to get those because they weren't in the system, you see?
Yes.
And that's why I get so frustrated with that logic.
And I think yeah, I'll even get frustrated with you here. You have to get more. Like I don't think two tackles are enough. Like I think Day said he wanted four offensive tackles. Like to have to get four in the portal is insane because you never want to build, especially the offensive line, entirely through the portal, which Ohio State thankfully doesn't have to do because they return their three interior guys, and they're all pretty talented out of high school. And Montgomery, I think, has shown the highest ceiling in play. Should be pretty good next year. But yeah, recruiting is very important, And then I'm personally a development guy, probably because I grew up in Michigan with like D'Antonio recruiting at best number 25 and then, murdering top 10 teams here and there, winning the Big Ten. And then Michigan didn't even have a top 10 talent roster when they won it all. But recruiting is very, 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 very important. And relying on the portal more than high school recruiting, I think it's asinine. It's not sustainable. And I think that Florida State is a tale of that. I think there's a very good chance Ole Miss could be the tale of that, as there's less talent entering the portal. And with COVID years running out, there's probably going to be a smaller quantity as well. And it's a dangerous game you're playing when you have to do what LSU is doing or what Florida State is now kind of locked into doing so that they can appease their fan and booster expectations. It's dangerous because if it doesn't pan out, then you might ruin your entire roster and have to start from scratch. I mentioned having to add more tackles to the portal. Do you think Ohio State will make spring window additions or no? I think it can be phrased as a question because their roster's still one of the best, so if they don't, they're still going to be pretty good.
Yeah, I do think they will if they can spot somebody that's going to fit. They could definitely use some more safety help. Maybe a sweet nickel pops up would be really great. I don't feel awesome about Lorenzo Styles in that spot. I don't know what they're thinking, but he seems to be the next guy up. But definitely, another tackle would be nice. Though they do have, with the two presumed with Daniels and Anyanwa, who just came in, being kind of the presumed starters. You've also got Ian Moore, who was a pretty doggone good recruit. I think a top 200 guy.
That's good.
And he's coming around pretty well. He's really, getting good reviews. So that's three really solid looking guys, I think, right there. And again, that's not enough. No, you're right. They've not gotten the quantity. So if they're out there, I think that they'll go jump on it if they can get that done. But as of now, starting lineup and one backup, I think looks pretty solid as we head into the season.
That's good news. That's always what you want to hear, especially on the offensive line, because I don't like injuries. I don't think anyone should enjoy injuries, even if it's to a rival team. But injuries on the offensive line are common, so it's good if, let's say, one of those tackles unfortunately gets hurt, they have a guy who can step up and just immediately kind of click.
I put this in this argument the other day, Sam, to somebody when I was talking about the numbers and the lack of numbers that Marcus Freeman and Notre Dame had three guys that had started this year hit the portal, and it didn't even matter. It doesn't put a dent in their room, and
Nope.
they're just loaded, right?
Yeah.
Why can't we do that, man? They're not on a different plane than we are.
No.
Why can't we have that?
Yeah, I have absolutely no. It's a question I've been asking in my mind, because, I mean, at least with Ohio State, they have the receiver talent, the running back talent, the quarterback talent. I think I saw it this year often where they don't need the O-line depth that I think Georgia or the Michigan teams over the past 3 years who won it all needed to have to win it all. They don't need Joe Moore Award caliber offensive linemen because they have Jeremiah Smith or Marvin Harrison Jr. and no one else really does. That's their thing. But it's always helpful to have that depth on the O-line, because something I've brought up before is this past year's team, for example, goes 16-0 without a doubt if they have better O-line depth. I don't think that's a question at all, and they'd be much better set up this year. But speaking of which, I think that's an appropriate way to look at Ohio State's 2025 recruiting class, because I know that there are players, mostly Devin Sanchez, who are viewed as potentially immediate impact freshmen. It's a sizable class of over 25 commits, and potentially the best QB in the class in Tavien St. Clair also joins the Buckeyes. So if you wouldn't mind, give us a rundown of Ohio State's 2025 recruiting class, and then we can talk about Michigan's, speaking of highly recruiting offensive line talent.
Yeah, really, really solid, well-rounded class. Carlos Loughlin was able to get 3 running backs in a year that you really wanted to get 3 running backs. He got 3 really good ones, keeping the best one home in the state in Bo Jackson, and then getting a real diamond in the rough from Philadelphia St. Joe's and Isaiah West, who was committed to Kentucky. But then he was able to go get Turbo Rogers, who's a real speed demon, a little bit smaller. Good-looking crop of running backs for Carlos Loughlin's first class in an abbreviated class he had to work with. So he killed it. And as far as impact guys, Fahim Delane is a safety as well that I think might actually be able to pop up and potentially get some playing time, as well as linebacker Riley Pettijohn, a 5-star out of Texas. And there was one other that I put on that list that I thought, just due to circumstances, might be able to get some playing time. Oh, Jarquez Carter. He's a defensive lineman, interior defensive lineman from Florida. That, boy, this guy's a dog, man. This dude would have been second on the Ohio State team last year with 28 reps of 225 when he was 17 years old.
Oh, I saw you mention that in a video. That was impressive.
He kind of flew under the radar because he's a little bit shorter and got overlooked until later on in the cycle, but they were able to lock him up and keep him home. But Larry got a good looking defensive line crop. There's nobody that pops off the page as there's not an Edric Houston. There's not a 5-star guy, but 2 good edge rushers, 3 solid interior guys. James Lernight has killed it with the linebacker room, getting Riley Pettijohn, TJ Alford, his 2 top targets, and then Eli Lee from my hometown, more of a classic traditional Tommy Eichenberg kind of style Mike linebacker. Of course, Devin Sanchez gets you an A regardless for Tim Walton, but only one other corner in Jordan Woods, who is a 3-star committed to Cincinnati, but he's 6'4". He's a really fun project. If you're going to take a 6'4" corner. But that's the only 2 corners. They would have liked to have another number there. Safeties looking real good with Fahim Delane. That was their number 1 safety on the board. Then you get Cody Haddad out of St. Ignatius up here in Cleveland. And Deshaun Stewart out of New Jersey. So that looks good. Brian Hartline took a different strategy that I think is really interesting. And I think we're going to start to see some of the top teams kind of pivot to a strategy like this, where instead of stacking 4-star after 4-star after 4-star and looking towards, trying to be tops in the blue chip ratio, you're going to see them add more 3-stars, because you want guys who are going to come in knowing right off the rip, I'm not coming in to start year 1 or year 2. This is a 3 and 4 year plan for me. And we kind of saw Hartline do that with the wide receiver room, getting 5-star Quincy Porter as his headliner, a guy who could potentially contribute immediately. I don't think he'll be able to, because there's 5 studs in front of him.
Yes.
But when you look at that, then you got your slot receiver, Des Jones. Then you got Phillip Bell out of California, who's a really talented, lower 4-star. And then you got a project who was a quarterback in high school, Bodpin Miller, who messed around playing wide receiver, just screwing around for a month, and came to an Ohio State camp and got an offer at the camp because he's such a freaky athlete.
That's incredible.
But taking some more strategic guys, trying to kind of stagger this out to keep guys in the program longer, I think it's a really smart idea. And I think we saw a little bit of it on the defensive line as well. Either that or Larry just, I don't know, didn't do so hot. But, it's a really smart idea, because when you stack 5-star, 4-star, 4-star, 5-star in a position group, you're going to lose them now. It's not even worth your time and your energy. So get some guys that know they're going to take some time to develop. They don't have this huge inflated ego that they need to play year 1 or year 2. And I think they're ahead of the curve with this. I really do. So good strategy. When you look at the offensive line, obviously well documented. There is no headliner. There's no David Sanders Jr., but I think Carter Lowe is a really doggone good tackle out of the Toledo area. And you got Javon McFadden, who's they're calling a swing man. I think he's a straight up guard. And, then Jake Cook. Those last 2, they're lower rated 4-star guys. But I think they both have the opportunity to be really good looking players. And that ultimately we won't know for 3-4 years. Who knows? But the numbers aren't there, Sam. It's just the three of them. The three of them on their own in a class that you wanted 5, maybe 6. And I just find that to be astonishingly poor. You know what I mean? So, but outside of that, I really like, Keenan Bailey. I forgot the tight ends. Listen, Keenan Bailey just got promoted, Sam. Keenan Bailey did a great job recruiting Nate Roberts, his number one target out of Oklahoma. And then he gets a local kid, Brody Lennon, who after Ohio State offered him, the services kind of started looking at him for real, give him a serious look. He was a mid 3-star. He actually gets rated over Nate Roberts, his original target. So 2 really solid tight ends. And then he's got a commitment in 2026 already. Keenan Bailey is really doing the darn thing. I thought those tight ends really improved quite a bit throughout the year. I thought they were the most least talented room on the team, and he was able to do pretty good with them. So I'm pretty impressed because I didn't expect big things out of him. But all in all, pretty solid class. And then, obviously Tavien St. Clair, who I haven't brought up because everybody already knows the story with him. Though I will say I'm a Bryce Underwood guy. If we're saying who do we think's got the brighter future, I think Bryce Underwood is just a little bit next level. That's my personal opinion.
I was going to ask that. I'm glad that you brought that up in kind of a I'm forgetting the word, but like you brought it up before I did. Yeah, I don't know enough to like declare who I think is going to be better between those two, but I trust 24/7 Sports. I trust your opinion, and I do know if from what I've read or at least what I think I've seen shows me, I do think he's more mobile than St. Clair, isn't he? Like,
yeah, he's a little bit more mobile. He's got a cannon, man. It's 20 feet off the ground, 50 yards down the field, frozen ropes. He's got the tools to be next level. So does Tavien, but they're just a little bit different level in my eyes.
okay. Yeah, I thought that both of them are like what the top 2 QBs in their class. Maybe Russell from Alabama's in that mix. It's crazy. I'm very happy that Michigan and Ohio State have the 2 best QBs coming in because I'm a fan of the game. I'm a fan of elite football, and if the game can be like the best game in terms of ranking on ranking, in terms of national title contender on national title contender over the next 4-5 years, that would be incredible. What did you think of Michigan?
That story is the coolest story ever, man. To have number 1 and number 2 quarterbacks in the country from Ohio and Michigan going to Ohio State and Michigan. Like, I love that story.
I love it too.
Was almost rooting for Michigan to flip him just for the story. Almost.
Yeah, I mean it's and that's something you wouldn't have seen a few years ago. It's because
Right.
Michigan, they missed on Dante Moore, they almost missed on Bryce Underwood. They've missed on actually a decent amount of their best in-state talent really ever since that 2020 year. So times are changing for sure. You mentioned pre-show that you actually like the trajectory of Michigan's program. I'd like you to tell everyone why that is and also tie that to their recruiting class, because I think this recruiting class is a big part of the reason why you believe that to be the case.
Yeah, well, a couple reasons. When Sherrone Moore, who I thought it was a risky hire, bringing in a rookie head coach who on the open market would have got a, perhaps a mid-level Big 12 job, and you're hiring him at a blue blood. And people would say to me, it's the same thing Ohio State did with Ryan Day. Well, no, it's not.
No, it's not.
Ryan Day had everything in place. All he was doing was trading chairs with Urban Meyer. Sherrone Moore had to hire half a staff. And we often see guys, that makes or breaks them early on in a tenure. And obviously, he didn't make perfect hires. He made some good ones, made some bad ones. What he did do was he didn't divert the blame. He cut bait right away with the offensive coordinator, which I'm impressed by. I don't think that that's an easy thing to do. And I think that a lot of people in his situation would have said, we had no quarterback. What are we going to do? We're going to run it back with this guy. He didn't. He got rid of him right off the rip. I think he personally got better as the year went on. He's obviously still got some clock management stuff and just some game day stuff that you'd expect he needs to work out. I think that it's pretty clear that the kids are gravitated towards him. But the biggest thing is there was a long time on the national scene and just in following recruiting where, you look at a guy and he'd be a top talent guy, and he would be in on Alabama and Georgia and Ohio State and maybe Oregon or Texas. And then I started getting into this with the class of 2025. And there's, some guys like that. Then there's some other regional guys who are Ohio State, Notre Dame, Penn State kind of guys. And those guys now, all of a sudden, the national guys, Michigan's on the board now. They're becoming cool. They're becoming a destination that everybody's aware of. They're doing a great job recruiting. They're pounding Virginia. They're finding little honey holes that they're pounding really hard, and they're doing great. Obviously, they had an abbreviated class this year. Not class. They had an abbreviated time frame where they weren't really all the way in till later on, and a lot of that had to do with when some money started hitting to give them the opportunity to compete at that level, and they took full advantage of it. They did a tremendous job. What they were able to do, I mean, number one, flipping Nate Marshall back from Auburn was huge. I thought Shamari Earls flipping him from Georgia was a really huge move. Obviously, getting Andrew Babalola from Kansas and then Ty Haywood from Alabama at the end there. It's just a tremendous class. Actually, getting a real wide receiver in Andrew Marsh out of Texas, I think he's really good. He's a guy that Brian Hartline wanted, and that says it all right there. It's just a well-rounded, deep class. Nathaniel Owasu Batang, who I thought was awesome in the cycle. I really wanted Ohio State to get him. I thought he was going to go to Notre Dame. He ends up at Michigan. And of course, the headliner, Bryce Underwood. But Kenoi Winston is a safety I really like. I was looking at all these guys and following them throughout the last year and a half, and did not expect so many of them to be at Michigan. It's a really good-looking class, man. Really good.
Yeah, it's a class that has more than 0 5-stars for the first time in a bit there, and the highest average player rating in a Michigan recruiting class, I think, potentially ever. I didn't check this for sure, but I remember the 2017 class didn't have an average player rating of a 92. It was like a high 91. And that's just incredible. I mean, 2 5-star or at least top 50 level tackles, a great, elite defensive lineman in Marshall, and the DBs, good. They have a potential X factor wide receiver. I didn't catch too much on the running back trail.
Oh, that's the one area I don't like. I think they got a couple of poor evaluations. I mean, the one, he blew out his knee. It's not really his fault, but
yeah.
The kid from Louisiana that they got runs with concrete shoes, and I know there's some Michigan fans excited about him. I don't know why. I really don't.
Well,
but
oh no,
let's not forget not just the 2 5-star offensive linemen, but they backed that up with Avery Gotch and Caden Strayhorn, two local Michiganders who I think both with Michigan State ties, actually, who they got to come to Michigan, who Ohio State and Justin Fry was also after really hard and lost on both of them. But, that's how you do it right there. You get a couple big guys, you bring in a couple local guys. Bravo. That's how you do it.
Michigan's O-line's like pretty young. They have a lot of young, talented guys where if they're just developed properly and placed together properly, they can create a foundation for a consistently elite, high-ceiling offensive line. You just got to, from at least the Michigan fan perspective, hope that all comes together, because talent's a huge piece of the puzzle. But at the end of the day, you got to put it together. I would rather have the depth on the O-line and the blue chip talent on the O-line than the running back room, like if I had to make a choice. But at the end of the day, of course, you'd wish that you can get a good running back commit. But it's nice to see that you, an Ohio State guy, but someone who's very objective and I think is a very analytical individual, someone who I'd even use the term expert for, you can have a good outlook here. I will say, from my perspective, taking off the objective cap for a minute as a Michigan fan, I'm still a bit shaky, just a little bit on the outlook, mainly due to coaching, though. I think the recruiting is where it needs to be and is going to get better from here on out. And obviously the money is here now. Like the boosters are involved in the way that they should be. I just think it's the coaching staff at this point. Like what are they? Who are they? If they're good, then I think it's an A+ program from here on out. But if not, then I don't know. We'll just have to see.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. Do you trust the head man? Do you believe in him?
That is such a difficult question to answer, um, for a variety of reasons, but I'm going to lean at this point towards yes, just because the Ohio State game you could have chalked up to Ryan Day just not being able to beat Michigan for whatever reason, a mental reason, maybe how he's built his team and compared to how Michigan has built his team. And there were a lot of hardball players left over, a lot of alien players that were developed by that previous staff, like the D tackles or Josiah Stewart on, the edge. Those players really helped in that Ohio State game where, the game plan was to run through Michigan. Well, you're not going to run through the number one defensive line. But against Alabama, a lot of those players opted out. It's not a rivalry. It's not like Ohio State where Michigan was in their head and you could clearly see that. It's Alabama. They didn't have any opt-outs. Michigan had tons of them. And the team came like they wanted to play. They were more prepared for the environment than Alabama was. They didn't fumble in the rain. And they pulled out a win with no offensive coordinator, with no quarterback. It was very similar to the most recent game against a, blue blood top 3 by team talent composite rating team that they had played. It was also Kalen DeBoer, who is one of the best head coaches in college football. So that was encouraging. But the Texas game, the Oregon game, I think more importantly, the Washington or Illinois game, those still kind of haunt me a bit, if I
Yeah.
gotta be honest. And the near disaster against Minnesota or USC or just I don't know in truth. But if I had to pick one, and I think that's fair to your question, I would lean toward yes, given how things got better as the year went out, or went on. He's willing to make changes. That's why he fired Kurt Campbell, a colleague of his for a long time at Michigan, after 1 year. And they're doing things right in the recruiting front. And last but not least, I don't think that strength and conditioning or being tough and physical was really ever a problem for Michigan all season long. It was more of like quarterback play or wide receiver play. It was previous weaknesses for Michigan that had just snowballed into something that was finally going to be crippling to a team that year.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, so looks like we're on the same page there, which is fun, which is, I think, a little bit humorous, but it is what it is. Are there any other recruiting classes in the Big Ten that stick out to you, Juck?
Oh, Oregon had a great class. Look, Oregon's class is not it's not rated higher than Ohio State's anymore. It was. They ended up losing a 5-star wide receiver commit who decided to stay in Florida where he's from in Dallas, Dallas Wilson. But this secondary with Trey McNutt, with Dorian Brew, with Naeem Offord, who they flipped from Ohio State, give these guys a couple years, Sam, they're going to be ridiculous. Like, it is a nasty looking unit. They loaded up with a couple of really good offensive linemen and Zaire Addison, a guy I really wanted. Maybe one of the best linemen in this class, but for some reason isn't rated that way. I don't understand what they're missing about this kid. Solid running backs, of course, solid wide receiver with the Decorian Moore, the number 1 in the country. And then they go and lose their wide receiver coach, and they'll just keep on rolling. Lanning's really becoming a real attraction for not just players, but coaches. But I love the class. I think it's fantastic. USC, they got a couple really good high-end players, but disappointment again for Lincoln Riley compared to where I feel USC should be. I don't know what it is. This guy's got an issue with California, but you should not be losing to Oregon in your home state.
No.
And it's just ridiculous. But you hear people talk, the high school coaches in California, he ignores the state. and he wasted his time going down to Georgia, trying to get, all the 5 stars from Georgia, had a couple hooked up with them early. They all flipped out of the class. So you wasted all that time, all that money. You could have been right there at home. They got plenty of talent. And then he loses Zachariah Branch to Georgia. It was the most hilarious thing ever because they were making a big thing about going down to Georgia and taking their talent. Their fans were all amped up about it. So a little poetic justice there, but very disappointing class for them, in my opinion. And Penn State, pretty solid looking class. But outside of that, Wisconsin really loaded up in numbers, which is good. I think that's what they need right now. Sam, have you seen their schedule?
Oh yes. They play like 7 or 8 teams. I was looking at my friend's phone when we were at Chipotle the other day, and I was like scrolling through them, like ranked opponent, top five, ranked, probably ranked. I counted like 7 or 8 teams who I think are going to be top 25 teams next year. It's insane.
Stunned. And it's Fickle's show me year, dude.
What do you think happens? Like, does he survive? Not even that. Should they let him survive? Like, if he doesn't surprise us?
This is an interesting topic. And this is what I felt heading into last year, where Billy Napier was in the same situation, right? Heading into the show me year 3, with a brutal schedule. I thought that Florida schedule last year, as we were heading into the season, was so brutal that it was actually going to work in his favor because everybody just talked nonstop about how brutal the schedule was. And I thought this guy can probably get out of this, 7-5 and keep his job because everybody keeps talking about how hard this damn schedule is. Now I'm looking at Fickle, Alabama, Michigan, Iowa, Ohio State, Oregon, Washington, Indiana, Illinois, and Minnesota. Like, you got to give him another shot after that, I think. But I'm surprised. I don't want to say I'm surprised. Wisconsin obviously has had a proud history. They were actually the team, not Penn State, who had the most wins in the Big Ten throughout the entirety of the 10 or the 14 playoff. And they've kind of fallen off. They're a proud program, but they were so excited when they got Fickle that I feel like they want to buy in so bad, but they seem to be turning on him. They're not feeling too patient around there with the Fickmeister. And I root for him, and I always like it when Wisconsin's good, so I'm rooting for that program. But I don't know how I'd feel if I was a Badger fan. It just the whole thing with Phil Longo just seemed so odd to me, right? Just such a weird choice to try to do that there. So I don't know if I would be totally bought in him if I was a Wisconsin fan either.
They got Jeff Grimes from Kansas, who kind of really likes to run like a power spread. Like, they're all about running the ball and trench play. So I think that was a sign that he's trying to get some buyback and return to an identity that, quite frankly, works for a Wisconsin.
Right?
Wisconsin, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It works for them. Just be you.
Yeah, Wisconsin is much closer to Minnesota than they are to Ohio State. Like, even though that may not, compute with some people, it just is what it is because the top programs are exponentially better than even program number 15 or 16 or 17, where there's a lot more flexibility in arguing who occupies that. Do you think that, out of a team like, let's say, Alabama or Michigan or Ohio State or Oregon, or even, at Indiana, Illinois, do you think there's a game there that he could win, or maybe 2?
I mean, you want to say like there's got to be one, but I can't point to it and say I think that they match up well with these guys and they're going to get them. I don't see that anywhere.
Yeah, I'll have to do some more research, and I have been pouring through these Big Ten depth charts and schedules, but this schedule it's scary. I mean, that is a schedule that, look, if Michigan had this schedule, Alabama would be an L, at Oregon would be an L. I would be tempted to pick at Indiana to be an L. Illinois would not be an easy task. Neither would Minnesota on the road. Ohio State at home wouldn't be an easy task either. And honestly, if not for the rivalry aspect, just roster on roster, I'd pick Ohio State beating Michigan at home, again, if not for the whole rivalry thing. this is an insane schedule, and I'm in agreement with you. If he goes 6-6, they better buy in with that schedule and with how
Yeah,
that roster looks. And
yeah,
I think they got to give him more time because he didn't inherit as much as people believed when he took over for Paul Chryst. I mean, Chryst
right.
kind of ran that program into the dirt. What about USC? Like, what do you think their whole deal is, and what do you think Riley needs to do to get buyback or to fix the program and keep his job?
The guy he's so arrogant, and he's operated his program that way. Finally, in last year, brings in Danton Lynn, who I think is really good. And they did have so many close games where maybe it could have gone the other way, but you didn't win, right? You didn't win those
Exactly.
games. And he sat up there in the press conference every single week. I mean, I know I keep saying it, but we were just this one play away from we could be undefeated. And he kept saying it every week. It was humiliating. I was embarrassed for him, secondhand embarrassment. He is such an arrogant dude that I wish nothing but bad on the program, which I can't stand anyway. I hate USC, always have. Um, but I just don't know, man. That they seem to be about to maybe turn the page a little bit if they can get a little bit better on defense. But at the same time, is this guy just snake bitten at this point? Do things just be kind of, I want to know what the vibe is around that team, because when you lose guys like Zachariah Branch and such, it just feels like maybe this is coming undone, coming unglued behind the scenes. I'm not sure. It wouldn't surprise me one bit because he is such a prickly son of a gun.
Yeah, I mean, it was very Scott Frost-esque when he was like, well, I'm going to say it again, but we're so close. We're so close. It's like, it just has to come together, and that's on you. And I think that he's learned, and I think he's gotten better. I don't dislike him as much as I used to because he finally got rid of Grinch and he made a good hire. Not just hire, but hires plural on the defense. I think they have one of the
Yeah.
best defensive staffs in the nation. But at the same time, when you kind of waste Caleb Williams and that offense there, and you move to the Big Ten, here's what I think the vibe is, at least from my outside perspective. The vibe is we're blowing everything up and we're trying to build a solid foundation before another non-championship season comes in, so that way we can win enough games to kind of build momentum long term. I feel like you can't expect to win at Notre Dame, whether it's Nebraska on the road or Michigan at home. One of those games will probably be a loss. Oregon on the road could be a blowout of biblical proportions, depending on what
Yeah.
that offense looks like. But if they go 8-4 or 9-3, second year in the conference after all they lose, from your point of view at least, would that give you like a positive feeling or more of a
Yeah.
negative feeling?
I'd feel positive, but they've got visions of grandeur still, those USC fans. So I don't know if they will feel that way.
Yeah, that's
They're going to be looking at this dude's been here 4 years now, and we're still losing 3 games. We should be in the playoffs for sure, especially after year one. And you know, when you look at people talk about him getting fired, like they held on to Clay Helton, and he was putrid. How many years? How many years after we all figured that out did they hold on to Clay Helton? Like he's not going anywhere if he doesn't
yeah.
want to go anywhere.
Yeah,
Of course,
they held on to Clado. They held
yeah,
him on forever. Clado Helton. It's just incredible. It's bad.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
whatever. It adds flavor to the conference, I guess. But
yeah, my
hey,
thought process is they need to win at least like a game against a good opponent, win some of those close games. And the scummy thing he did, you were saying how you really don't like him, and it's understandable. He held on to Grinch for longer than a year and just he kind of tore everything apart and made that year one. Year one was impressive. They were never, in my mind, supposed to be that good in year one, and the power ratings reflect that. When they were 11-3, almost were going to be put in the playoffs if they beat Utah, and they weren't even top 8 in FPI. Like they were not supposed to be that good, and they were, at least on, in terms of you are what your record says you are, which isn't always true, but whatever. And then, 7-5, 6-6, they got to bounce back in some major way. And the problem is it's not the Pac-12 anymore. So you just, the schedules are going to be tougher, and it's not your home environment anymore. Like, there's more competition for Cali recruits, and you're traveling everywhere too. Like, you are not Michigan or Ohio State, where you don't get to travel as much because the conference is still basically yours. You are the outside guy having to fly everywhere for your road games, which obviously takes a toll.
For sure.
Last few things I want to touch on before we let you go here are your way too early predictions for 2025, and also your view of the Big Ten's power structure. Like, we know that Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, and maybe Michigan are the big four there. Who do you think's the most likely to join that group, and who do you think is the most likely to fall out as well in the near future? So let's say, like, next 4 years, next 5, like when these current recruiting classes are all kind of on their last year, on their way out.
Yeah, so I think we all kind of see Illinois maybe having a good year this year, but long term, maybe moving forward the next 3 years, I am a big believer in what Matt Rule is doing at Nebraska, and the money that's behind him. Like, they're believing big in him. Nebraska is really on my radar as the team that could potentially move up into that power structure. I don't see Oregon, Ohio State, or Penn State falling out of that. So I would say the most likely one, just because, right now you'd still say Sherrone Moore is on the most shaky ground of the 4 programs. However, the financial investment really, I wouldn't bet on them falling out of it either. I think they'll all 4 remain there at the top. And I think Nebraska going to be a school that can join them. If anybody is going to, I think they're the most likely right now, which I would have said for sure USC. And I do want to say this, the Big Ten not having Ohio State and USC play a game in USC's first 2 years in the Big Ten is the most asinine thing I've ever seen in my life. Like, it's so bizarre to me how you would make this huge move and pump this up. We got USC, UCLA coming into the Big Ten. Remember that? It was huge news.
Yes.
Before we knew about Oregon or Washington. And they had all this time to do this. We don't play them the first 2 years. This is crazy to me. But Anyway, here we are. Another prediction I got is I'm seeing everybody's rankings. I haven't seen yours yet, Sam. I understand why everybody is so down on Alabama and having fun dancing on their grave. But I think Alabama is going to be the surprise playoff team, which is weird calling it a surprise. But, I just look at the talent on the team. I've always believed in DeBoer. They had some goofy games, some wonky games where they underperformed. And I just feel like this is the year he's buckling down. They played early on in that season like they were a team that was that had the Saban restrictions lifted off them in camp. And that's what we saw the videos coming out.
Yeah.
And it looked a little too lax. And I was like, man, this doesn't look good. And that's how they played in a couple of those games. He's realized his mistakes, I think. He's tightened up. He gets his old buddy back, calling plays. I don't know if I don't believe Keelan Russell might not be the guy that ends up starting for them by the end of the year. He is a stud, total stud. So I think Alabama is going to make the playoff. I also think that if I was picking right now, maybe the 2 teams in the national championship, I think one of those teams might be Clemson. I think I'm way higher on Clemson than most right now, and I think that they really got something rolling. Bringing Tom Allen in there, Cade Klubnik's just getting better and better. Those freshman receivers are going to be better. You lose Phil Maffa, they've got 2 stud freshman running backs, and obviously that's a position that you can start a freshman at and not worry too much about it. So I'm really digging Clemson as we enter into the year. I'm also excited to see what Washington can do, Sam. I'm a big Jed Fish guy. I'm a believer in Jed Fish and what he's got going on. So I've not looked a ton into them, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if they elevated this year as well.
I think those are some good insights there. I had Alabama inside, or no, it was, well, in the video it was just outside my top 12, but I've readjusted that since. They're inside my top 10. I really liked how Ryan Grubb is their new play caller. I think that's going to do a lot. I think that him getting through his first year is helpful in DeBoer. As for Clemson, the more I think about it, and I haven't, poured over their depth chart a bunch, but I expect with all they're bringing back, those freshman receivers, Matt Luke coaching the offensive line and them upgrading defensive coordinator, that I don't think it's a bad pick either. And another reason for that, for picking them to participate in the national championship, is Sweeney's been there before. But I think more importantly, they play in the ACC. I'm just going to say it here. They play in the All-Charmin Conference. Now, the advantage of that is you're not getting beat down like if you're in the SEC or you're in the Big Ten. And something that I think we saw with Georgia last year is Georgia just got so destroyed by their schedule that they were not the team they were at the end of the year that they were at the beginning of the year. In fact, I don't even know if they were that close. Clemson doesn't have to deal with that, and yet they have enough good games like LSU at home, South Carolina on the road, where they can build a resume, and they can, I just think, really have a good year. They have a lot of experience, manageable schedule that can help them work in some pieces if they need to, and they have a great coaching staff. As for Washington, that's a, you know what? That's a team I'm going to research in my spare time when I have that, because they had a good young quarterback last year, and I think DeMond Williams Jr., who should be their starter. And as for your view on the power structure of the Big Ten, one last question that I have is anything about Indiana in there, or do you think you have to see them really use that money that they have to recruit at like a consistent top 25 level?
They were so old last year. I haven't seen them add a ton in the portal that would make me think they're going to be able to sustain that level of success. I think I think he knows what he's doing. He's a really good coach, and they're going to consistently, potentially be in the mix heading down the stretch. But I don't see them having another team like they just did. Who I think is really interesting this year, Sam, is Georgia. I think we're about to see Kirby Smart make the Jake Fromm, Justin Fields mistake again if he doesn't start Ryan Puglisi for that team. I think it's going to look like that 2.0. And I don't know, man. I just feel like this guy he's just got this hang up sometimes. I don't understand how you can be in a state with so much talent and consistently have underperforming offenses. These guys had so many drop balls. It led the country in drop passes by like 15 balls. Blows my mind. The running back talent somehow down at Georgia. Their offensive line was abysmal, and we just automatically see them they're in everybody's top four all the time, every time. I wouldn't be surprised if they finally took a regression this year, because I think they really overachieved last year. I didn't think they were as good as that record was. So, and I don't think they've gotten any better. I mean, you add Zachariah Branch, you add the wide receiver from Texas A&M, and those are really good additions, and maybe one of them hits, maybe they both hit. But if they don't start Puglisi, I don't think they're going to get the ball to them, and I don't think he's going to start him.
Interesting. That's an interesting take that I'm going to be paying attention to for sure. They lose a lot, so it is imperative that they get all of their evaluations right. And I don't know why they underperform. I think that in hindsight, the only reason their offenses have been good is really Todd Monken for those 3 years. Like, that's it. Like, that was the genius behind those offenses, and I think in part consequentially those national championships. So it'll be interesting to see moving forward, but to be fair to Kirby and I think everyone else, that's kind of what you get, I think, and what you're going to get over the next decade when there's no Saban. You're going to have every coach, even the ones at the top, where it's like, why can't they get this one thing right? Why? And I think that's just the nature of, you no longer have the perfect CEO. He doesn't exist anymore. and
So
probably
are
won't
we
for.
admitting now as a college football public that he is not in fact the next Saban? Are we going to go ahead and admit that?
I don't think so, and I didn't even. Maybe I said this like on my channel before, and if I have, then someone can absolutely correct me. But I don't think I've ever believed that he was going to be like that. He would have the highest odds, yes, because he came directly from that tree. But it's hard. It's hard to do what Saban did. I mean, think of like Joe Paterno or Tom Osborne or even Ohio State's former Urban Meyer, who won 3 titles and won them at different schools. Like even those guys are not viewed in the same way that Saban is. Like Saban's a one of a kind. You don't get that once
Yeah.
every decade. You get that once every century or
Yeah.
maybe once every
That's
50
why it was so
years.
ridiculous to me, Sam. The guy won his second championship that very well could have been Ohio State's championship. And he wins that championship. And all of a sudden, it was just like the media and everybody else just, here you go. Here's the keys. You're now Nick Saban. And then he retires, and all the Georgia fans just say, well, Saban's gone. It's ours now. And they're going backwards. And I couldn't be happier about it. But
That's funny. All
when I
right.
look at Notre Dame, Sam, wow, Marcus Freeman's so impressive, buddy. That's my last word. I'm so impressed, man. Kind of jealous, maybe even. I don't know.
Well, that's something to pay attention to, and I think something that we can have you on to talk about maybe in the future about another college football segment's Notre Dame. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Juck. I appreciate it a lot. I'm just going to give a thanks to our Patreon members, and then we'll see you behind stage. So
Thanks, Sam.
thank you, and we'll have you back on soon, or maybe I'll come on your channel. Regardless, it's nice seeing you grow, and I'm impressed with the work that you do. You're an inspiration to this channel, and I have no doubt other college football channels too.
Thank you so much, buddy. You too.
All right, everyone, make sure to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. Thanks to Crash2488, Brasco Rascal, and Connor Little OH for being Heisman members. Thanks to Chris Lane, Ismar, and Tyler Nye for being All-American members. And thanks to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, Joshua Jorgensen, and Will Loftus for being all-conference members. Check out my merchandise store, Patreon page, and Discord server via the links in the description or down below in the pinned comment. I will see you all very soon. Go Buckeyes, and whatever your, whichever team you cheer for, I hope that they have success too. See you guys soon.